Hello ladies and gentlemen, it's the Historical Gamer once again, and today I'm going to be returning to Total War Attila. What is this, part 8 of my Let's Play? Part 7? I lost count. It's been a little while since I made a video on this, and this is a series that I do intend to finish, as long as it may end up taking, or short if we look at the Eastern Front, where the Persian Empire and their lackeys continue to threaten our empire, and we really have no tools to stop them at this point. But basically my point is this is going to be a series that I intend to continually come back to from time to time. It's something I continually am going to play, and I want to share the experience with you. Even if I'm not very good at the series, I certainly have a long ways to go as far as my talent on the battlefield and my full understanding of the Total War games. I do quite enjoy Total War Attila, however, so I will continue to play it and continue to do periodic videos on it. It may end up becoming kind of a filler series where I play and put videos in when I don't have anything else going on right now. That might be the route we end up going with it, but we'll see. Certainly something that is not going anywhere, however. I have a few other series which probably fall into the same category. Commander of the Great War is one of those. I know a lot of you have been asking if I'll be returning to that. I do intend to return to that here shortly. There has been a minor issue that's preventing me from doing it right now. There's an issue with the most recent patch that's preventing me from being able to finish my my turn that I'm on in the middle of. I was going to cancel the series, but I actually did get in contact with the developers of the game. We're working on a patch quickly that will fix that issue. So hopefully we won't have any issues with that, and we'll be able to go ahead and get that series resumed. That seems to be one of the very popular series I have. I've got over 40,000 views now between all the videos, and pretty well spread out. Seems like almost every one of those videos gets a pretty good response, and a lot of people seem to enjoy the series. So I certainly intend to return to that, kind of my World War I anniversary series, if you will. Speaking of World War I anniversaries, I also do intend to return to End All Wars Breaking the Deadlock for some of the stuff I was doing for wargamer.com. Again, that's something I just haven't had a whole lot of time lately for, and that's because of the last game I've been playing, Brother Against Brother, the Drawing of the Sword. Been having a lot of fun. You can see my last two videos are on that. And I also intend to look at Order of Battle Pacific, which is a game that comes out in about a week. It's a Pacific World War II turn-based strategy game, and looks pretty interesting. So I intend to cover that pretty heavily as well. But among all those things, I also would like to return to Buzz Aldrin Space Program Manager, and yeah. Now, again, this video wasn't really intended to be a status update, just kind of talking through what we've got here in this particular video. There's not a whole lot of fighting. I recorded the series already, or I recorded the video already, and I'm doing the audio after the fact. So it's a little bit different. A lot of times I do the audio while fighting, and then you guys rightly point out that I'm terrible at fighting while talking, at least in a real-time engagement. Often I struggle with that. So in this case, I decided to record the gameplay first and then record the audio later. Let me know what you think about that, though, because I do worry that risks kind of losing some of the immersion, and it's hard for me to necessarily tie in what I'm saying with what's happening on the screen if I'm not thinking about what's happening on the screen while I'm trying to talk. So that's an issue I'm trying to see if I can work through and do an adequate job. It's not the first time I've ever done it, but it's generally not something I broadcast either. Anyway, so we're in the middle of a garrison battle. Flavius Cannius, commander of a garrison army, is being attacked by some Eastern Roman traitors, I suppose. There appears to be an uprising that we have to deal with here. As is the case throughout the Empire right now, we really don't have adequate forces to keep our cities defended. We have one mobile force in the west which has managed to deal with the Goths. I can't remember if I don't think I destroyed them entirely, but I definitely drove them back and killed their leader, and their horde is a shadow of what it was before. We also drove back, was it the Alans a couple of videos ago, another barbarian tribe, and we dealt with a third barbarian, a smaller tribe that had incurred. So we've done a pretty good job parrying some of those blows. The Goths did a fair amount of damage to some of our cities here. But the rest of the barbarians have been held pretty much at bay, but all these constant attacks have really limited our ability to build up a strong frontier force. So it is representing the situation at this time in the Roman Empire pretty accurately, where there'd be kind of garrison forces along the frontier that would more or less just be there to kind of act as a tripwire to slow the barbarians down, and until essentially the main bodies of the Roman forces would be able to respond and come in and kill them, hopefully in a decisive battle in favor of Rome, although certainly not always at this time was that the case. Now, one thing I will say is that in this case, like I said, these are some Eastern Roman troops who have turned against us, and one thing that I'm also struggling with as far as defending in the West or defending anywhere is the fact that the Persians have been very successful, wiped out, I want to say, 2 full-size armies of ours, badly crippled a third, and are kind of ravaging eastern Anatolia and are threatening to take our holdings in Syria as well.
Don't forget that your units have a
mainly
range of
because we
abilities
simply don't
that can
have
be
any
used to
forces that
improve
can
their
seemingly deal with them. The Persians or Sassanids, or however you pronounce that, they just have much higher quality units than most of the forces that we'll face on the western half of the empire. And the western half is the only spot where we really have a truly very, very strong army. We have had a few other large armies in the east, but they've been largely very light units based, not peasants per se, but kind of those lamati or whatever they're called, the entry-level spearmen, essentially, the barbarians living inside Roman territories that pledge their service to the Romans in exchange for being able to exist in Roman land, essentially. They're not real high-quality Roman troops. There are very few high-quality Roman troops at this stage of the game, especially in the East, which, as time would go on, would become more and more reliant on mercenaries. And my hope here in this battle, as these enemy troops charge forward, is to use these archers as a way to slowly bleed the enemy to death. My plan was to have the infantry engage the enemy troops and prevent them from destroying the watchtowers, and as a result, the watchtower would continue to throw arrows into the enemy while our troops fought to their front and ended up basically hitting them in the rear. Now, the problem in this case was, well, I didn't get my troops positioned far enough forward, and you can see this watchtower here was just destroyed very early on without being able to do too much damage, largely because I didn't deploy my troops far enough forward. If they had been deployed far enough forward so that the enemy couldn't move up and attack those positions, that strategy might have proved more useful. My hope was to pull the troops back a little bit down the road, hopefully having the enemy ignore the tower, which obviously they did not. And by falling back down further down the road, I would be able to essentially limit the frontage that the enemy could bring against us. So even though they might outnumber us 2-1 or something to that effect, they'd only be able to bring an equal number of troops to bear against us in that narrow road. Didn't end up being the case. I'm pulling my general out of the main fight here because they're under attack from ranged units, and deploying him to the other watchtower, hopefully being able to pursue that strategy of using the watchtower to fire arrows into the enemy should they be attacked. Meanwhile, I've deployed my cavalry and infantry here in this roadway, and they're fighting it out with several enemy units of much larger size. On our other flank, we've got some heavy infantry that are currently under attack by some axemen and 2 cavalry units. We'll see how long they hold out. Appears to be an even fight, but if that's the case, we're certainly outnumbered and not what we want. Meanwhile, we've got one other watchtower which is throwing arrows into the fight, kind of as I had envisioned, but they're too far off really for that to make any kind of substantial difference. Meanwhile, we've got our cavalry and infantry engaged here against the enemy, and we'll see what happens here. My guess is we lose the battle. Not enough maneuvering, too many enemy ranged units, no ranged units on our end, and the loss of that tower early in the fight probably means the city will end up falling to the Roman rebels, although they don't seem to be too strong, so I'm pretty confident that my mobile field army will be able to respond and hopefully destroy the enemy within a turn of them taking this city, which I'm sure they will. And in taking the city, the goal in my mind is to make sure that they lose enough that it's an easy victory for our army when it comes in. Again, not intending to really defeat them on the field of battle here, just more or less force them into a Pyrrhic victory where they're not able to exploit their victory and do not last as a threat to us. The last thing I need with all these barbarians on our frontiers is to have to worry about internal dissent, which was always, at this stage in the Roman Empire, a serious risk for Romans and for the ruling families or parties or whatever have you in Rome. The fear largely, very often, was internal dissent, which undermined the country's ability, or not country really, but the empire's ability to defend itself from external issues and dissent. So, kind of letting our horses here hopefully rebound a bit. Meanwhile, the fight on this roadway, it looks like we pushed back 2 of the 4 enemy units that were against our heavy infantry here, but they've rallied that 1 cavalry unit, so it's kind of 3 units are still there out of the 4, but they're certainly losing heavily, so that is a positive, I suppose, is that the enemy is losing heavy casualties regardless of what we're losing, which is substantial and almost the entire force. The enemy is also losing substantially. So in this case, on the right, I didn't deploy my troops far enough forward to use the watchtower. On the left, I deployed my troops too far forward to utilize the watchtower, although further in the rear would have allowed the enemy to come around that other alleyway and flank my other lines. So it was basically have 1 unit too far from the watchtowers or 1 unit too near to the watchtowers. I don't know why I randomly decided to go out and check out the peasants, who apparently decide that the middle of an assault on their city is a good time to be farming. I suppose the hope was that it would add ambiance to the game, but it really just looks silly when they do that. Meanwhile, you can see our other heavy infantry off on the right is retreating now, and the enemy heavy cavalry is coming in behind them to eliminate what's left, but there isn't any. So we've got our heavy spear unit, which has our general in it, and a battered up cavalry unit is all that is left. Meanwhile, we've got 1 watchtower here, which, maybe it'll inflict some casualties, but it's certainly not going to wipe out a whole enemy unit before itself is destroyed. And that's the rough situation. We do have 1 other watchtower where our general is. So the enemy cavalry is going straight for our own in the heart of the city. That main objective center in the middle there. You can see there we just charged into the enemy horse. They outnumber us pretty substantially, probably at least 2 to 1 there in that fight, and I'm sure our men will be defeated here shortly. You can see they're bringing some horsemen into our rear.
The men have given up and are running for their lives.
Meanwhile, our spearmen, I make perhaps a foolish move to move them away from the tower and charge toward the enemy. Yeah, the enemy's kind of dispersed at this point. But at the very least, I think they're a little closer to the tower than the other troops were, who were a little bit too far away for the tower to hurt. Well, I think, we go ahead and we halt them here, and kind of indecisive. I want to know what those boxes are. Like, what is this thing here with all these boxes? What are we fighting in the midst of? But it has to be good terrain for dealing blows to enemy horse, because it's rough terrain at the very least, whatever they're running through. Assuming the terrain is modeled by the game, is something that would affect the horsemen. Meanwhile, we made the mistake of probably deploying out that way, so now we've got our spearmen with enemy cavalry to our rear and infantry to our front, so not ideal. Again, the archers from this tower are having some effect on these troops. You can see them knocking out the occasional soldier there, and that is going to help, but the enemy just has too many men right now. We're just too heavily outnumbered for that to really make too much of a difference as we're engaged here in this fight. So, more melee combat. You can see here, looks like the enemy horses are retreating, but they're retreating in the direction of the watchtower. Not exactly what we want. So we dealt them a blow. The spearmen have obviously proven their worth versus enemy horsemen, which is no surprise. Spearmen are excellent against cavalry, but there you can see our only other unit is running now, and we have lost a close defeat. So, Flavius Cannius, the garrison defender there, loses all but 79 of his men, but they'll all be killed because the Eastern Romans will probably kill them. Meanwhile, we inflict almost 50% casualties on the enemy, who now takes Marcianopolis and the most northeastern of our provinces. So you can see civil war here. There's rebellion, attrition, famine because we just lost an important harvesting, and we secured an office that we had been attempting to gather at the end of the last video. Rebellion in this province is where those Eastern Roman rebels came from. Or wait, no, these are Dacan rebels. So this is a separate. We have 2 rebellions in the east. So that's not fun. And it's not like we can sally forth our garrison, despite the fact that rebel group is pretty small. But anyway, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to try and retake Marcianopolis. We'll deal with the Dacan rebels later. Daca was a province of Rome north of the Danube, I want to say, during the reign of the 5 good emperors that ended in 180 AD with the death of Marcus Aurelius. Daca was a province which had been held, I believe, by Marcus's predecessor. Maybe was it Trajan, who ended up taking the province of Daca, but then essentially it proved to be too wild, too far beyond Rome's ability to defend, and Rome decided to fall back behind the Danube as a natural border, using the Danube as a natural security blanket, that large river which was very difficult for people to cross. It almost acted like a giant moat for Rome's Balkan frontier, rather than Daca, which was in kind of Hungary and Romania, which was much more open, hilly, but no natural boundaries to protect the empire from incursion, so the Romans did fall back there. This is all pre-splitting of the empire, like I said, the period somewhere between like 100 and 180 AD, roughly. I know it ends in 180 AD. I don't remember exactly when the reign of the 5 good emperors started, but we're pulling our emperor Flavius Arcadius back further into Anatolia. The last thing I want is the enemy to attack his army. It is not yet ready. It is too small. So we'll go ahead and here, and we'll start building up some cohort units to complement our spear infantry, and pull them back from the frontier a bit to make sure that they're not too endangered from the enemy forces. Meanwhile, we have 1 legion that's left intact in the Palestine region, the 3rd Legion. We're going to go ahead and move them, hopefully to threaten Edessa. We don't have the strength, I think, to liberate the province, but just want them in the vicinity to kind of hopefully make the enemy think, and maybe their presence will draw off a smaller enemy army and maybe allow us a victory here, especially if we raise some mercenaries to increase our strength, since we actually have a fair bit of cash on hand at the moment. So we'll do that. We'll raise some additional infantry units and hopefully expand our forces' strength now with those 4 mercenary units and the addition of 2 new Nadi. I need someone to help me pronounce that. The name of the barbarian Roman soldier spearmen, essentially the equivalent of peasants. They're not peasants, but the equivalent of peasants that we have to rely heavily on to fight our armies, fight our wars, because we don't have the resources to build traditional Roman armies. Again, situation models the real Roman Empire very accurately at this time. Even though the East was much more rich than the West, or much richer than the West half of the empire, it certainly was not able to field the armies like of which the early Caesars or late Republic was able to field. Anyway, so we retook Marcianopolis. We weren't able to deal with the Dacan rebels yet, but we retook that city, and still trying to manage with the with the Persians in the east. and all of their various tributary states. So you can see here the enemy took the bait, pulled out of Edessa, pulled a substantial force out of Edessa. Thousands of troops there pulled out of Edessa, at least temporarily. It looks like a good, well, maybe not, a good chunk of them pulled back to Nispis. So we did pull some troops out of Edessa, or at least out of the surrounding areas, to chase off our army, but they didn't pursue us as we withdrew. So the 3rd Legion, I suppose, did its job, maybe by doing that, by diverting those troops. It prevented the Sassanids from launching an assault against Edessa. That certainly is possible. That's definitely my hope. You can see here north of Edessa, however, we just had a province attacked in Meliti, which is kind of eastern Anatolia, and looks like that province was defeated by whatever. It wasn't I don't think that was the Sassanids Empire themselves, but it may have been like a tributary state to them, which just attacked and defeated our garrison there. Meanwhile, issues with pilgrims, so some diplomatic stuff that we're going to have to deal with, but not at the moment anyway. I'm a little preoccupied. There's a whole family tree, family interaction that I think tries to model itself somewhat on kind of the Crusader King's mindset. But right now the situation in the Empire's military frontiers is just too desperate for us to really do anything at the moment, so we really just need to try and stabilize the military front, and then we can worry about the civilian front. Meanwhile, General Vindonius, a key Roman general, he's kind of the bulwark defender of Greece and of the western half of the empire. He's won all of our victories in the west. He demolished the Goths, the Alahans, and the other tribes that crossed into Roman territory, just defeated the eastern Roman rebels, and now we're trying to send him after the Dakans. His army's pretty beat up and exhausted, but it's also the best balanced and formed army that we have as the Eastern Republic. So even though we only have one army in the west dealing with, why'd I say republic? It's not a republic. But we only have one army in the west dealing with the Balkan frontier that's under Vindonius, essentially the guardian, the shield of Constantinople. Meanwhile, in the east, we've got a bunch of small armies that we're trying to build up, but it seems like before we were able to build them up every single time, they end up being demolished by the Persians, who are really the only other empire at this point in the game. There's the West and the Eastern Roman empires. Other than that, the Persians are really the only other empire that has any ability to challenge Rome in terms of kind of an established state, an established status quo power, whereas the barbarian tribes are kind of the rival rising powers. The Sassanidans or the Persians, depending on how you want to call them, are kind of the status quo hegemony type powers of their region, where the other ones are all kind of, they want to be that, but they're not quite. Meanwhile, we continue to build the 3rd Legion up there on the borders of Edessa, hoping that the enemy doesn't launch a frontal assault against the city. It does have a pretty substantial garrison that could certainly thwart any attempts to attack the city, but they're not enough to really stop an overwhelming assault, just enough to maybe act as kind of a speed bump and give the enemy pause, which they've done so far. So far, so good with that. While we build up our 3rd Legion and our forces in Anatolia, hopefully for a decisive counterblow against the Sasanians and their tributary states. We just need to buy time. That's really where we're at. We need to buy time. Meanwhile, just kind of looking at this new unit here, looks like it's another barbarian-inspired unit that will end up making up a huge percentage of the Empire because they're actually comparable with the cohorts. They're heavy infantry, but they're not quite as disciplined. They're not as good in every respect, but in some respects they're better, and they're a little bit cheaper too. So these new guys are kind of supposed to replace the Limilati or whatever you call them. Again, I'm butchering the pronunciations there. That's actually what they do is they replace them, but they don't, or maybe they don't. The Commences. Yeah, no, they do. The Committancies. But they also are good enough to replace the cohorts in a lot of situations as well. So the cohorts are kind of the more traditional Roman men-at-arms soldiers. So kind of trying to decide what I want to do as far as building my forces out under the Emperor and another army which is approaching Sinop in northern present-day Turkey, or the region of Anatolia, trying to build up 2 strong legions here to sweep east from Anatolia to drive back the Persians, to help the 3rd Legion near Edessa, and hopefully drive into the heart of Persia. My goal is not to defeat on the battlefield the Sassanidans in the sense of imposing victory upon them. I would rather that they just agree to stop fighting and give us peace. A white peace is what I really seek. I would like to be able to stabilize the empire's finances, start building some things to kind of improve our budget situation so we can deal with situations like this more quickly and readily. But unfortunately, the eastern kingdoms have not been all that accommodating and are pressing and frustrating us, requiring us to deal substantial resources to deal with them, which is putting on hold any sorts of reforms or rebuilding or construction or what have you in the east. So you can see here the enemy has moved forward to attack our army there. We have withdrawn, but it looks like the enemy had enough movement points to chase and now fight us. So you can see here we're outnumbered very heavily, more than 2 to 1. We have virtually no chance to win, so rather than waste 20 minutes on a certain defeat, because I'm not a very good commander at this point in time, we're going to simulate the battle. And you can see there it was a decisive defeat. The enemy only lost about 300 men, so that was a disaster. Yeah, that couldn't have gone much worse. Maybe I should have fought the battle out. I'm sure I could have killed more than 200 people. So, anyway, this video is less of a battle type situation with things being fought and resolving things on the field of battle, and more just kind of simming through, getting things into position and building up the empire and preparing things, rather than an actual video which is focusing on combat. You can see here the enemy's, I don't know where I am, attacking something. I think, oh, this is our northern force in Anatolia under our emperor. We're pulling back closer to Sinop. You can see here now as we pulled back to Sinop, the enemy has pursued us and launched an attack on the garrison there. So our 1,100, almost 1,200 men is now up against 1,800, but by pulling back to Sinop, the enemy has given us a better chance because we got the 560 men garrison to help us. So just shy of 1-to-1 casualties or what have you. And the army there, the garrison there, in conjunction with reinforcements from the emperor, has won a Pyrrhic victory. We lost about 1,000 men. The enemy lost about 1,400. They've got about 400 left. We've got 681. The garrison is probably the group of the armies that's considered to have won a Pyrrhic victory. You can see there several enemy forces have been bled so heavily that they are going to be eliminated from the army altogether. Other forces are well below 50%, and that tribe, the Abarashka or what have you, which is a client state of the Sassanidans, has fallen back. So our first major victory in the east, it was a simulated victory. I didn't end up playing through the battle myself, but a victory nonetheless, with Flavius, our emperor in the east, fighting the battle out. I do intend in the future, my hope is that anytime the emperor is on the battlefield, we'll play a battle out, and maybe when non-family members are fighting, we will just let the battle simulate. But anyway, we're probably approaching the end of this video here. We're about 28 minutes in. So we just won that major victory in northern Anatolia. Meanwhile, the city of, I don't even know, I just can't see it here. The Word is the name of the army that we're facing under that tribe. You can see here we've got another army we've just brought in under Appius Bantinius, who is the fourth part of the 4th Legion, which had won that victory against, I want to say, the Vandals, or was it the Alahans when they crossed east from the Bosphorus into Anatolia from Constantinople after the defeat. So we bring his fresh army in, and it annihilates the enemy armies. We can go ahead and recruit the defeated into our armies to help with replenishment. Meanwhile, the Emperor's force Flavius Arcadius is substantially weakened, so we'll have to go ahead and retrain some new troops. I think we're going to go with the Comitius spears. They're not quite as good as the cohorts in every way, but they are certainly better than the troops we have in place, and we can go ahead and recruit them. Meanwhile, we'll have to give the 4th Legion some time as well, but we will recruit some of those troops also as a way to help offset some of the losses, and then just give it a little bit of time to help those armies replenish themselves. We will have to make sure that we give some time to these 2 armies, but if we can build them into strong, full-strength armies of 20 units, and we can move them into the east, we may yet still save our empire against the Persians. Meanwhile, moving back west, we can see Vindonius here dealing with the Dacan rebels. About 1,400 of them versus over 2,100 of Vindonius' troops, and then some garrison troops. It makes it more of like a 3-to-1 fight. We defeat the Dacan rebels there pretty easily. We lose about 600 men. The enemy lost over 1,400. And we can go ahead and... Should we kill the captives? Got 183. Nah, we defeated them. We'll just go ahead and we'll recruit them into our army. You can see there we destroyed those enemy troops. And at the moment, the western half of the empire is at peace, although it does appear there's an enemy tribe, not technically at war with us, moving to southern Greece, so we'll move Vindonius down that way to keep an eye on them, and also moving him into Thessalonia should hopefully help with replenishment and recruitment, although the bread situation is concerning. But anyway, guys, that's it for a mostly simulated video and less actual fighting. I do hope you enjoyed the return to Total War Attila, and until next time, this is the Historical Gamer saying I'm out.